Good evening, everyone. My name is Mick Stott. I served in the British Army for around 30 years and I'm now a veteran, a very old-looking veteran. But we've got a very exciting show tonight, and our show is just one in a number of shows within this series, which is about saying no to conscription. And I'm possibly better placed than many to make that show, I reckon. We're looking at what the purpose of conscription is from a number of different perspectives, and we've got some great speakers with us tonight. We've got Christopher Helali, we've got Louise Scrivens, and we've got Warren Thornton. So we're going to get some very different and varied perspectives on this as a topic. We're looking at the purpose. We're also looking at what our perspective or the appetite is around the country when it comes to conscription. We're looking at Gen Z, how they might shun this, basically, because they've learned a little bit more than the average person, or maybe they just don't want to engage with that kind of activity. And is there a bigger picture to this? That's a question that I always ask, having served for so long. I've never trusted the likes of Tony Blair, who for me was always a war criminal and lied like a cheap watch. And so we're also taking a look at what the impact of this might be on society as a whole. I specialize in mental health, and I can assure you that having seen the situation as it unfolds when it comes to participating in combat, I personally have sat with way over 5,000 individuals on one-to-ones, helping them with the rigors of trauma that tend to present themselves in the way of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And so we've got some very great speakers, and I'm sure that as we go along, we'll ask some questions so that we can get as much as we can from a very short period of time that we have to present this topic. And on that note, I would like to introduce Mr. Christopher Helali. And Christopher will just give us a couple of minutes on who he is, and then he'll go straight into some of the questions. Welcome, Christopher.
Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So, Christopher, from your perspective, give us just a couple of seconds on who you are, a couple of minutes rather, and just sort of feed us into what it is you want to say about conscription.
So, my name is Christopher Helali. I am an honorably discharged first lieutenant in the U.S. Army. I went through airborne training, was a paratrooper. I did the military because of the agreements I had for policy of the United States and the struggle I had against U.S. imperialism. So I never served in combat in the U.S. military, but I volunteered with the Kurdish forces supporting the Syrian Arab army and Russian forces in Syria for 9 months fighting against ISIS, against Daesh. So I saw firsthand what combat looked like in Syria and spent 4 months on the front line where I was injured and then eventually left the campaign in Syria before the fall of Raqqa. So I have a real tangible idea of what war is like, especially a brutal war like that, with the involvement of so many groups and brutalities, especially from the enemy. And of course, I am very much against the US war machine, the Western war machine, and of course, US-EU NATO imperialism, which continues to mire the world in chaos and destruction.
And so, Christopher, you know that the US has a military strength of around 1.3 service personnel. If anything was to unfold with Russia or potentially China, what's your take on that as an opposing force?
I mean, with Russia, of course, I think the 1.3 million would be utilized to their full extent. With Russia and China, or with China alone, I think that we would need to also have a draft. We would also need to have conscription here. And I think that that would be deeply, deeply dividing in the United States. I think that there would be tens of millions, if not more, who would adamantly oppose that. I think that, as you were rightfully pointing out at the beginning, young people know about the failures that the West has experienced in these past decades of the quote-unquote war on terror. You mentioned Tony Blair on that side of the pond being a war criminal. George Bush was much the same, right? So when you look at this, when you understand this, I think that many young people, many Americans who are conscious of their state, the true nature of the U.S. Military-industrial complex, of our war machine, they understand that these wars are not fought on their behalf, but they are fought for the ruling class. They are fought for big money interests, and they're fought to stabilize the powers that be. And so when you look at, historical figures like Smedley Butler, who was a U.S. Marine, who spoke out against U.S. militarism in Central America and beyond, you realize that I think there would be a tremendous amount of pushback, even though the U.S. government would try to do it and would try to institute some type of draft, and have even mentioned, there are certain politicians who have mentioned this as being mandatory at this point, even in peacetime. I think that you would see a tremendous pushback from the American people on that.
And do you think that would take the form of conscientious objectors, or people that would just say no? How do you believe they would push back, Christopher?
In my situation, I resigned from the mission, citing being a conscientious objector, and was able to get out for those reasons. I think others would certainly do that. I think that there would be numerous exemptions, physical, mental. There's a whole slew of things that people would do. I think people would also leave the country, as they did during Vietnam. People left to Canada, to Europe, to other places as well. I think that you'd see even a campaign of direct action, non-violent and violent, against recruitment offices, against these stations that would be conducting a type of conscription, a type of draft. We remember, of course, during Vietnam, even clergymen participated in burning those draft cards and in seizing all of the information and documents. So when you look at that, you understand that history, you know that there will be definitely pushback. I know that there are many in the peace community who would choose the path of nonviolent resistance, even direct confrontation. But I certainly think that it would escalate even for some people.
Yeah, and I find it's really interesting. I was out in Jacksonville working with a group of clergy that were present in the Vietnam conflict, and of course, those that were present were literally forgotten. They were vilified when they came back, and I just wonder if there would be that kind of similar climate that might be resultant of this type of situation. What are your thoughts on that, Christopher?
I think that Vietnam was a particular time in American history. We had, don't forget, before that we had two Red Scares, we had McCarthyism, we had a tremendous amount of misinformation, disinformation about the enemy, quote unquote, Vietnamese, whoever it might be, communists, etc. And so in that environment, anyone who disagreed with the U.S. foreign policy, even if they were still a patriotic American, which all of them were, in my opinion, patriotic, they did their due diligence and they fought for their sovereignty and their rights, they were still categorized as traitors, and they were labeled as such. And so that's how people saw them, and that they were allying with the quote-unquote pinko commies of North Vietnam and things like that. They choose Ho Chi Minh over George Washington and things like that. Yeah. Even though most Americans don't know that Ho Chi Minh based all of his ideas off of the American Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, right? He admired the American revolutionary spirit.
And of course, we talk about the word sovereignty, and it's a really interesting concept, because the only thing that makes a war, let's say, lawful is if you're defending your sovereign turf. I don't think that anyone would contemplate for a moment that if you take up arms against another country and you're not defending your sovereign turf, that becomes unlawful. Do you have any thoughts on that, Christopher?
Absolutely. I mean, that's in line with international law and all norms and standards of all of the quote unquote the laws of war that we have, right? The laws of armed conflict that have been decided over the centuries. We have prescriptions for how war is to be conducted, and we have numerous things that we learned as officers in the military, both you and I: proportionality, the proper targets, what's not to be targeted, what's to be protected, cultural heritage, all of these things. But when you have military officials who discount a lot of these things, or you have militaries that go and do regime change, that go offensive, they preemptively countries because they fear the country, that is illegal under international law and under all norms and standards.
Well, it's nothing less than terrorism. If you look at the the Terrorism Act, it constitutes terrorism. Absolutely, it does. And you talked loosely about profiteering from war. Do you want to expand on that slightly, or?
Absolutely. I mean, if we look at the wars that have been conducted, especially by the West in the past decades and even the past centuries, what were they for ultimately? New markets, commodities, whether it be agricultural products, petroleum products, rare minerals, precious metals, even for people, even for slaves or servants or new labor forces. They overthrew governments that protected their markets, that tried to nationalize their industries, that tried to keep the wealth of their people in their homeland. And they went after them. We remember, of course, 1953, so which the US and the British worked together on because they wanted to overthrow Iran, so that at that time the Anglo-Iranian oil company, what became BP, could go there and siphon off the wealth of Iranian people for the British. So when you understand this, when you understand that in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, Halliburton made a fortune, all of these major corporations, all of the contractors, all of the private mercenaries that were there, when you look at that, when you look at the economics of it, then you understand that not only is war a racket, but war is a money-making opportunity for the ruling class. And that's what they use it for. And whether it's to secure resources that they need, to expand the markets, or to destroy competition, they use that weapon of war always as part of their arsenal.
Absolutely, they do. And of course, the irony of it is you never actually see any of the major players' sons and daughters on the front line either, right?
That's right. That's why if they really cared, if they really wanted to fight, like George always says, put on the tin hat and send your kids there. You go fight.
Yeah, lead from the front as opposed to from somewhere back home with all the remote stuff. And of course, the whole essence of war fighting has slightly changed now, in terms of there's an awful lot of drone type warfare. And I also think, maybe you have a take on this, but certainly I see some of these threats creating smoke screens for some of the other things that are happening at home and abroad. Do you have a sort of a take on that at all?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at technologies, we're employing drone technology, artificial intelligence. Now we have confirmation that Israel is using artificial intelligence in its bombing campaign, in its genocide of the people in Gaza. All of these technologies have a boomerang effect, because while they're deployed in war, their purposes are being adjusted for a domestic front in this war, right? They're going to surveil us. They're going to monitor us. They're going to use AI to target. They're going to use drones to look above us. So those things that go on out there always have, as Amy Cesare always talked about, this imperial boomerang. They come back onto the domestic population, and they will be used against activists, against people of conscience, against those who disagree with the government and its foreign policy, including my friend Mohsen Madawi, who was just arrested on Monday, a Palestinian, American resident, who was a student at Columbia, who fought the rights of his people. But just for having an idea, they went after him, and now he's sitting in a dungeon here in Vermont, and we are campaigning for him. That's the fear that many are having today, that all of these systems abroad are coming home, that the chickens are coming home to roost, as they say.
Well, let's face it, at some point they have to trial the things that they're likely to use with anyone. And if the conditions are right, I've learned this, whatever you do to someone else, if the conditions are right, you can expect that to be done back to you. So it's just a matter of producing the right sort of conditions and environment for that kind of tyranny. And I totally agree with you on that. Do you have, if you think about the types of young people that are coming through universities at the moment, do you have a take on whether or not these people even have a sensitivity to something, or whether they are even robust enough to contemplate going into that environment. I mean, I wonder if you have a take on that at all.
I don't think so. I think that many people are not aware of the reality out there. I think especially in the West, especially in our two countries, which have been imperial powers for so long, their populations have been insulated. Even the people have been insulated from the Great Terror unleashed even across the way, maybe even in Ireland during the enclosure period and during all of these periods of time. Now, of course, in the US, many Americans do not feel the pain and suffering of the people who have experienced war and chaos and destruction beyond our borders. So when I was, for example, at this recent arrest of my friend, the state senator who was next to me, who was almost in tears, she was shocked. She said, "I couldn't imagine this happening." I said, "My dear, happened." I think many young people now with social media have become aware because they see these videos day in and day out, and they understand not only the brutality, but the barbarism that our own governments promote, that they fund, that they support. And I think that they understand in at least in an intellectual way that those things are coming here. But the thing is that once you experience it, and you and I know very well from the front lines, once you experience it, it becomes a somatic experience. It becomes something you cannot get rid of. It becomes part almost of your DNA. So in that way, I think a lot of young people are not yet prepared to understand and to really take in what's to come. And I think that that's why we are campaigning very strongly against war, against the government, against its positions, because we don't want people to experience what we experienced. You know, they always say that the war fighter fights more for peace because they know what it's like. And so for those of us who've seen it, we are the biggest advocates for peace. I'm at the forefront of the peace movement. You understand, if things keep going in a direction, I'm afraid of what's to happen to many people and what they are going to experience, including my own children, my own family.
Yeah. I lost you there, Christopher, for a moment. I think that's the nature of the internet sometimes. I think I lost you there, Christopher.
We're back. We're back.
But thank you for that. That's great, and it's great to get your perspective on it, because it's quite a fresh perspective from my from the way I've seen things. But thank you for offering some of your information.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, Christopher. And now let's talk to Louise Scrivens. We've got Louise, who's going to give us her take. Louise, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
No, and Louise, what is your take on this? Do you prefer Louise or do you prefer Lou?
Either is fine. I'll answer to either, whichever you're more comfortable using.
Okay,
So,
Louise. So, I mean, do you think there's an appetite for conscription in Britain?
No, not really, not from what I've seen. But then I live in the peace world, so I'm surrounded by people who want to encourage peace. And as Quakers, we have that as one of our central themes. But I wasn't always a peace campaigner. I grew up in the Middle East, and I went to boarding school. I got inculcated with, British Empire values. And then I wanted to join the RAF, but failed the hearing test. So I ended up joining the intelligence corps in my late teens. And I went into the TA because the actual, the medical that they did in there wasn't quite as tough as it was when you were trying to get into the actual armed forces themselves. And that was a quirk of fate that actually saved me, because that was in 1989, and we went to war with Iraq in 1989, 1990, the first war. And it was like a slap in the face and a wake-up call, because suddenly I'd not thought about going to war. I wanted to be in the army to do good things and to look hard and to carry on with what I'd been trained and indoctrinated in, which was our British supremacy and our right to, police the world. So then, after having children, that was my first sort of awakening. And then my second sort of awakening was after I had children, and I started looking deeply into what I wanted them to inherit and what kind of world I wanted them to grow up in. And I just drifted further and further away from what I'd been taught, and what I'd been, the values that you inherit from your family and your environment. And I just started questioning everything. And I went to the DSEI exhibition in London and protested there. And then I went to another protest in Telford, at the Telford International Centre, and got arrested there, and been through a whole court debacle to be found not guilty. And now I'm back out. But I've got sons who are of conscription age, and it does worry me that we're not planning for peace. We're planning for war, and yet peace is infinitely cheaper and in all sorts of ways. But the way that it seems to count in this world is the money, and it's cheaper in money as well as human suffering and all the other things that come out of war. So sorry, that was a bit of a long introduction to me. Gosh.
We're certainly having difficulty with the internet. tonight.
We
So
are.
I was loving that, and the thing is, you're not just coming from you're coming from a peace movement perspective as well, aren't you? And you're clearly a member of the peace movement, yeah?
Yeah, definitely.
Would you call it the peace movement, or would you call it the freedom movement?
I would say that it's a peace movement, because peace starts actually with people, individuals, and spreads out. And if you look at any lasting peace that has been forged over the years, so if you look at in Ireland, for instance, peace started with getting the right people around the table, and it happened to actually include women as well. And I think this is where we as nations have a problem. We don't have the right people sitting at the top tables discussing the right sort of things, the right questions to forge peace. We're so focused on forging war and defending our interests. We're not looking around and looking for the compromises and the ways that we can walk into peace rather than into war. At the moment, I think we're not sleepwalking. We were maybe for about 3 or 4 years, but now everybody's waking up. We are actually walking into war, and the reason for that, some of it, is the way that I think it's the way that we've treated our neighbours and taken them for granted. And I'm not talking about our near neighbours. I'm talking about the Balkans and the you know, and the ones that border on Russian territory. And we've just thought we could act with impunity around there. And we've been told, no, you can't. But nobody's talking about diffusing situations. Nobody's talking about how can we calm this down. Just how can we ramp this up. Conscription is another way of making people fearful about the future. Talking about conscription instills fear into a populace. People
well, I think we could agree that it put the icing on the cake for Rishi Sunak, right? The moment he started to talk about conscription, that was obviously going to be a showstopper. But I actually think that was more by design than it was by chance anyway, because there's only so much stuff you can put into a space that's negative, and then you just let the next successor of the overall plan step in and pretty much do the same thing, but with a few bells and whistles, yeah?
Mm.
And do you have a take on that, Lou?
Well, I don't think I can tell the difference between Labour and the new Labour that we've got in now and the Conservatives that we had in, but they're all in service to capital and to the military industrial complex. So what do you expect? So we have corporations that will profit from war. We've got companies that are already profiting from war in this country, and now they want the blood of our children again to profit from war. And I say no, that's just not acceptable to me.
And as a matter of interest, if you think about the potential impact on the people that you're around and the people that you interface with, if we were to go into that type of scenario, which I don't think is ever going to actually happen, because I think it is one big bluff, and I think it's another way of hypnotising the whole of the UK, and at the same time slipping in things behind the scenes that just create even more control. But what do you think would the impact of that might be on society as a whole, based on your perspective?
We've already seen the impact on society. We've seen that disagreement with the government is now a difficult thing. We've seen democracy being undermined because we're not allowed to make our feelings known strongly. We are arrested. Our places of worship have their doors bashed in at Westminster a couple of weeks ago. You know, people, and this is the other thing that we're not talking about. The wars that we're ending up entangled in at the moment are all about resources for the end times, because we've got to decarbonize, and we do. I mean, the science is clear. global warming is happening, and we're right in the middle of it now. And the weather has been lovely, but what that's meant is, you know, the weather is just what's happening today, but the patterns are all out there to see, and you can, you know, the science is clear. But I'm not here to talk about the climate, but a lot of the scrabble for resources around things that will allow countries to mitigate their carbon budgets, get more resources for their low tech stuff, and also some of it is to do with the high tech surveillance stuff that they want. You know, graphite is really, really strong. Ukraine has got quite a lot of graphite, and it will be in the new drones, and it will be you know, they're talking about graphite chips that will be ultra fast and ultra macro tiny, and there's all this stuff going on. I read Wired, can you tell? Who did incidentally have a really good YouTube on state surveillance and how it's coming for us, and how they can track people who are protesting. So I would not be surprised if I ended up well, I probably am on a watch list now, but I wouldn't be surprised if I ended up being harassed or you know, intimidated by the state at some point because of my views.
Well, I mean, to be fair, when I being ex-military, and I know that you're ex-military, so I smelled a rat the moment I saw behavioural conditioning going on. And I created an organisation that went out and trained equally in excess of 150,000 people in common law. I taught people sovereignty, and I taught them that in reality, the freedoms that you have are not given to you by any government. That's what they want you to believe. But the government actually serve you, and they serve you with your consent. And so we went out and did the same, really, Lou. And of course, that naturally makes you someone that they want to pay attention to. I was interviewed by The Guardian, by a guy in the Guardian newspaper. And he had the audacity to even suggest that I might be far right. Now, that's really interesting, considering that I served at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst as the staff officer too for adventurous training, and pretty much led Harry and William through their adventurous training mentorship, and had to be vetted at top secret level to do that. So, so the challenge that you have is that even though we come from an objective perspective, when someone has an agenda, Lou, as you can see that these people do have an agenda, doesn't really matter what you say or what you do. They're going to run their agenda if we don't say no. And I think if enough people say no, then no means no, right?
Yeah.
So, Lou, sorry, go on.
I was just going to mention that if anybody feeling inspired to get involved in more peace work rather than opposing something, do something positive, there's a big camp at Lakenheath over the Easter weekend and into next week. Today was women, they were honouring the women of Greenham Common there. Yeah. So that's why that reminded me to think about, you know, that women aren't included in talks to have ceasefires and things. And when they are included, they generally are better, last longer, and are more structured.
Well, I personally run a lot of trauma programs, Lou, and I can tell you now, I wouldn't do any of those programs without having women on those programs as my coaches, because they add another dimension to it. And they bring a different thing to the party, to the typical male perspective, and they always turn it into another dimension and make it more welcoming, more accommodating, and always more fruitful.
Mm. Well, anyway, that was just a brief plug for Lakenheath, because it's all going on right now over the weekend and into next week. So if anybody wants to find out more, do go.
Smash it. And a little bit of peace will never do you any harm, will it, Louise, right?
No.
Okay, so thank you, Lou. That's fantastic. And thank you for being on the show tonight. And I'm sure that people will have got some very valuable stuff from your perspective on that. So let's say hello to Warren Thornton. Warren, who is going to introduce himself a moment. Yeah, that's it. Here we go, Warren. Welcome.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael. Just to let people know, I was a military sniper for 6 years in the British Army. I saw action in the Falklands War in 1982. Then I spent 8 years looking after people in war-torn areas, obviously looking after aid workers as protection for people in war-torn areas for the next 8 years. I am probably better known for being the journalist who was arrested for exposing the Nazi in the Parliament, the Ukraine Nazi in the Canadian Parliament, for which I was arrested and then they let me go. Currently, we have moved to Manila, getting ready, and obviously having good contacts with the Chinese embassy, getting ready. We moved here 8 months ago, having seen that the America-Chinese war was going to start in 27, 28. So we're here sort of positioning ourselves ready for that.
So Warren, from your perspective, what do you believe is the purpose of conscription?
The purpose of conscription is knowing full well that if you are going into a war that you don't have the numbers to fight. That's the first thing. The conscription is absolutely along those lines, because if you're asking for more people to join the military, you don't feel confident that you have enough to be going in with. I don't think we're going to go into Ukraine. I think we're going to be a behind the scenes type bunch, unless, of course, the Americans pull out. Starmer is maybe crazy enough. I'm not quite sure yet. Of course, he is, should we say, a wet puppet and a banker's puppet. And there are minerals under that Ukrainian soil that they would like. And of course, the EU very much want to keep hold of the mineral deal that they already signed in 2021. And of course, they're willing to share that with Starmer. The Americans are also coming in for a deal. So there's lots of minerals to go around, apparently. But of course, politicians, bankers, and arms dealers are the only ones who win wars. Now, when you have conscription, it means you are not certain of the outcome and you feel that you might need more people. And of course, you have to remember, we haven't been involved in a trench warfare, a proper trench warfare, since 1945. We've never been in a drone warfare. We don't speak the language and we don't know the topography. So conscription would make sense because they have already looked at how the Challenger 2 tanks have got on in the Ukraine war, which is not very well at all. And of course, we have no idea of drone warfare. So the losses are expected. And of course, they will want more people to go into the military. It is one of those, and while we're sort of talking about that, I think it's very important to remember that in Bakhmut alone, they lost 120,000 people in the space of 8 months. So when you think that the British Armed Forces are only 73,000 in the army, of course, there is more Navy, and of course, there is, of course, should we say, more in the Air Force. But when you think of those numbers, and we're getting that from both sides, not just from one side, they lost 120,000 soldiers in 8 months inside Bakhmut. How long do you think the British military would last? And we're having Ukrainian soldiers that are coming over to Britain, and I'm speaking to various people. Michael, I'm speaking to people when you consider Ukraine lost 120,000 people in that short space of time, 73,000. They would need conscription. They would need conscription to get more and more people, should we say, because they're not confident of the losses that will come along.
Yeah. And of course, you being an ex-sniper, you and I both know that requires a certain level of fitness. How do you reckon that translates to the average person that might be asked to join the military at the level of conscription?
Well, I
know the answer to that, but you give us your perspective on it, Warren.
You and I know, Michael, that is a really, really bad idea, because first of all, you'll get people who, don't want to join the military. And if you have conscription, they're pretty much forced to do so. And of course, you want guys who are volunteered, who are committed, who see it as a sort of lifelong thing. Now, you want to be able to, if you go into a war situation, you want to be able to trust the guy next to you. And as I found out to great cost in terms of seeing people in a different light. You never know how people are going to react until they come under fire. And as I just said, we've never entered a drone warfare before. And of course, it is like having guided artillery, really. They can just come along and drop bombs straight on you. So it is one of those where you never know how you're going to react. This is a particularly brutal war, something that we've never really experienced since, I would say, the First World War. Second World War was a bit more, shall we say, not as brutal as the First World War in terms of what you were asked to do and the conditions you were asked to fight in. And of course, we've got British military asking Ukrainians coming over here to train what it's like under these war situations. And if you stick an ordinary guy into this battle situation after a short period of training, I don't think they're going to fare very well.
No, and of course, you and I both know, Warren, that the whole purpose of artillery and bombardment was to actually demotivate the enemy ahead of any advance, right? And of course, I can't think of anything more demotivating than having remote attacks by drones, because you don't even know where they're coming from. I mean, if you look at the type of war fighting at the level of helicopters now, you know, helicopters don't even need to be in the vicinity. It's almost like a video game, you know.
Yes, absolutely. I've got to say, Michael, I was lucky enough to be at the Chinese embassy a few months back. And of course, they showed us exactly how their drone warfare has literally gone forward. And we're talking about drones here that can navigate their way through a bamboo forest and be directed straight onto the target. And you were talking about hundreds of them with sensors on. Now, we are miles behind anything like that, Michael, as far as I'm concerned, in the British Army. Their technology and the Russian technology has caught everybody by surprise. And you're absolutely right in everything that you are saying there. And of course, when it comes to morale, we both know that morale plays a huge role in how effective your fighting force is. And of course, there is the other thing as well, that when you first take a life, that is something that stays with you forever. And it is something that you have to work through on your own or with help.
Well, and you know what's interesting, Warren, about that? I was over in America when I was working with some of the clergy in Jacksonville. I ran a post-traumatic stress disorder program over there for the clergy with the Vietnam vets, essentially. And whilst I was there, I ended up chatting to some drone operators, and of course, they also suffered from the consequences of what they were doing, even though it was remote.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's the same when you take a life through the scope of your rifle. Very, very simply, you still see that face that you still see, and of course, the first time. And as I say, you never know how you're going to react to this sort of thing. And people, my way of dealing with it was, if I didn't do my job, then of course they were going to kill all my friends and the people around me. So I was able to sort of compartmentalize and rationalize that. But many, many people cannot. And if you take people who are not suited to the military and you put them in, you will have loads of people, loads more people who suffer from PTSD. You will have loads more people who have emotional problems. And remember that we had over 6,000 veterans on the streets, and over 600 of them suffering from PTSD, who have got no support mechanism once, of course, that battle is finished. And I fear the same would happen. Because governments, bankers and arms dealers win wars, we either suffer economically or we suffer psychologically or financially, you know, as they say, financially. And of course, it is always, isn't it, as was in the Vietnam War, it's the poor kids or the kids from underprivileged backgrounds or the middle classes who end up fighting and dying in these wars. And of course, the people at the very upper levels, their children never get involved, do they?
Well, and not only that, if you consider the situation with the IHAT investigations, Warren, they haven't really left the veteran alone. So when you look at the money that was spent and wasted just on investigating veterans for things that they did in the theatre of operations, I'm not saying that people shouldn't be accountable for what they do. We have rules of engagement wherever we go, but I think you also know, Warren, that when you're in a high pressure situation like that, everything makes sense, and it's highly contextualized, so you can read into it what you want when you're not in that space, but you weren't in that space, and it's not quite so simple when the pressure's on. You're tired, you're doing your job, and you're in conditions that you're not used to, and all of those things add stresses that don't normally exist in everyday life. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and the stress that's going to come even more if you get involved in a war in Ukraine is literally you're looking skyward. Now, you can't look up and look down to see if you're going to go over a tripwire or anything else while you're looking up in the sky for buzzing drones. So you're going to be even more. We used to have a saying of ears pinned back because you're listening so hard that it literally.
Yeah, startled stag syndrome. Yeah,
That's the one. Yeah.
yeah.
But now you'll be like this,
Yeah.
So it is a stressful situation, and to know also that the advances that have gone on have really made, how can I put it, infantry warfare, infantry against drones doesn't work now. Digging into trenches doesn't work now. Even tanks get blown up and disabled very, very quickly. In fact, I was speaking to a Merc who just got out of Kursk the other day, a British mercenary soldier who just got out of Kursk the other day, and he barely escaped with his life. And over half the people he knows that set off trying to leave, obviously, the Kursk region, perished through drones and everything else.
Well, if you just look at the numbers, Warren, and I'm not sure that Russia have even deployed a big percentage of any of their ground troops, really, because you don't need to if you're doing the remote type work via drones and that type of mechanism. But even if you just look at the numbers, anyone with any nous would soon be able to work out that if you look at the numbers and the ratios of us putting boots on the ground, how it would just completely, you would be obviously going into a situation where there's a great chance that you're not going to be coming back. And the chances of you returning from Ukraine, I think, would be negligible. I mean, what's your take on that?
Oh, you're absolutely correct. I mean, we know the mercenaries are there. There's been over 12,000 mercenaries fighting on the Ukraine side. Half of them are now gone. Many of them are Colombians, funnily enough, because, of course, when France managed to get the Colombians to be peaceful, of course, a lot of the Colombians, the rebel Colombians, had nothing to do. So the French asked them if they'd like to go and fight in the war in Ukraine and get well paid for it. The other problem that you have as well, when we're talking about this, we uncovered a thing, and we highlighted it last week, was that very simply, they're looking to open the grain corridor again. And the reason they didn't want literally Georgescu taking charge in Romania is because they wouldn't have allowed the French troops, which will make a dart for Odessa should the Ukrainian side collapse. So the French and the British are very much invested in this. And we would have planes literally at that, which is the biggest literally military airfield in NATO, is in Romania and right on the border. And of course, they want to get control of the Black Sea. So you'd have Ukraine transporting grain and weapons in the Black Sea, with the French Navy alongside them being escorted by British planes. The Russians are not going to allow that. Suddenly, we've got a real situation developing.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, from my perspective, when you look at the bigger picture, you know that there's a lot of puppetry going on when it comes to this, and yes. For me, there's a lot of, and dare I say it, it being quite controversial, but there's a lot of cleansing of certain areas, ethnic cleansing. If we look at other theatres of war that are going on at the moment, and all of that is for a bigger purpose. Do you see a bigger purpose in this, Warren? I mean, we've talked about who makes money from war. What would be a bigger picture from your perspective?
A bigger picture from the perspective is to once again try and get that balance back. China and Russia are a problem for the West as far as they can see. And of course, Russia have always had China's backdoor in the north, because China have had one or two problems there, and the Russians have always had their back. And the trouble is, we've got the EU, which are pushing the smaller nations who don't particularly want war. And this, shall we say, the rise of neo-Nazism would be of a concern for me, because we are supporting basically ethnic cleansing. Now, the whole reason this started, and it never gets, shall we say, highlighted, in 2014, the Americans, with the help of Victoria Nuland and the National Endowment for Democracy, overthrew the democratically elected Ukraine government. And we are not going to get a peace deal anytime soon, because Zelensky's just given himself another 6 months of martial law. And he knows full well that if a peace agreement is signed, then they will have elections and he'll be out on his ear. So the bigger picture is the West don't want this. Certainly the European Union do not. And of course, then we're looking at China down the road in 27, 28, and the Americans are trying to slide out of the door of Ukraine. They want to get a peace deal, which is, how can I put it, good for them, but they are prepared to take their losses and walk away, and they can just say, well, when we walked away, it was a stalemate. There's nothing of the sort. And this war is going to go on for at least another 6 months. Kaya Kallis and her sort of band of cohorts, shall we say, are looking to raise another 800 billion to keep this war going. And of course, they'll do that by trying to outsource weapons and build factories and everything else. But what do they think is going to happen? The moment that they start to build factories in Ukraine, they are going to get hit by the Russians, and they're going to get hit hard.
But look at one of the contradictions of this, Warren, as well, because if you look at the ski resort, and I don't know if you've seen that.
Yes.
Look at that for a complete contradiction and a way of installing or creating even more confusion, because it's completely contradictory to a theatre of war. It's something that really just is completely off on a tangent. And for me, anything that installs confusion or creates confusion or creates, let's say, a focal point for people to fix their attention on, tells me that there's something else generally going on that they don't want you to see. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I absolutely think so, because let's face it, any dissenting voices whatsoever are being silenced very, very quickly. There is a control of the information space. The propaganda is off the charts beyond belief. And of course, when we look and see what's happening, we've gone down a familiar route here, haven't we, Michael? We had orange man bad with Trump. We're having red man bad with Putin. We're going to have yellow man bad with Xi Jinping very short. Yeah,
totally. Well, I think that brings us to the sort of thin end of the wedge, though, Warren. And thanks a lot for your input. It's always valuable and very informative. And I look forward to the next time we chat. I think what I'd like to do now is maybe sum things up. You know, we've taken a look at what we believe the purpose and perspective is on this situation with conscription, and we've taken different examples, different perspectives on that, which have been very, very useful. I personally feel that the current generations that we are training are not robust enough for these types of situations, and that could be for two reasons. Maybe they've learned so much that they realize that in reality war is futile, and that some people are now becoming more educated to recognize that war is created by those that profit from it, and that there's a much bigger picture going on because of the things that are happening across the globe at this moment in time. I think I'd also like to let all the viewers know that the Workers' Party of Britain are contesting some important by-elections on Thursday, the 1st of May. And we've got the Runcornian and Deputy Leader Workers' Party, Peter Ford. He is contesting the Runcorn and Helsby by-election. And so, you know, if you can get out there and you can help, if you could let us know and get in contact with Peter and his team, then Peter is on Peter's Twitter, X, and Facebook, and he's posting in the viewers chat. You can put some information in there, and you can no doubt go along and help with that. It would be fantastic. And local girl and community campaigner Laura Pugh is also contesting the Balderston and Kirkall by-election in Greater Manchester, which is my neck of the woods, God's country. and so I'm a little bit biased when it comes to that. It's the home of a great pie. And so she's a great candidate. She's very well-rounded and certainly doesn't lack any energy when it comes to getting out there and letting people know who she is. So if you can help Laura out and her campaign, that would also be very, very much appreciated. And we can provide a contact number for her in the viewer chat, so that's no problem. We're also contesting the mayoral elections in Doncaster, and our candidate Hassan Jamil is the Workers' Party of Britain candidate there. Details for his Facebook and Twitter and X are posted in the viewer chat. Now, if you are in Great Britain and Northern Ireland and can help them out on the campaign, please donate what you can and link this to the viewer chat. That's the information that we're being given. I personally have enjoyed hosting tonight's show. I've made my debut, I think, doing this, and certainly I'm quite happy to do more. I hope you find this very, very useful. We also have other topics that are going to be covered as we go forwards, and we invite you to let people know who we are as a party, to come and join us, because I believe that under George's guidance and Uncle Hawes and Peter and all the crew, we're the only ones that are calling out the bigger picture and are happy to do that. And equally, I do have to say this, that out of all the people that I've met in the world of politics, Big George is the only man who seems to be telling the truth and walking his talk, and has done that on every level. So I wish you all a very good evening and a fond farewell, and say, as they say in France, au revoir, which means until next time.